I guess we may as well get started. Welcome to the fourth in our series here, and I hope to see you for the last lecture. They'll be on the underbelly of Impressionism by West Bend's own Graham Reed, and he said that he's going to give us. He said that we want the PG or the R-rated version, and we asked for the PG version, but you can request the R-rated version depending on what you want. You know, I imagine he can do both ways. So in any case, let's see. By the way, next year, I think we're going to be able to pull this off. Is we're going to try it again next year, and we're going to be doing Russia. So we're working on that. We'll see how that goes. So in any case, want to make sure that the sound system is working. By the way, great. And a lot of the reason why is that the sound system for the last two lectures, including this one, has been is courtesy of the payment by Al Kiefer and the Ambassadors Council. So we're very grateful for them to providing the support for this. So let's see. Our lecturer tonight is Ken Farmer, and he'll be speaking about the French criminal justice system. And I've learned a lot just sitting here talking to him, and I hope you learn a lot tonight then.
Thank you. It's amazing how many people are here. It is just a great opportunity you guys have to have this lecture series. It really is. This is actually the largest group I've had to talk to regarding this subject matter. Obviously I've talked to larger groups before in conjunction with the practice of law and at conferences and things like that, but in terms of this specific subject, in my book, Chez Betty, this is the largest audience I've had. So I appreciate you guys coming out and wanting to listen to me about this subject. I really think it's a good series that exists here. And I think you probably learned a heck of a lot in the process. My interest in France started with my travels sort of in the middle of my career as a lawyer. I ended up going there a couple of times with some friends and decided that I wanted to learn French, all right? And I took French in high school, didn't really apply myself. I passed the classes. I didn't want to take it in college. So if you took it in high school, you got out of that, you know. And that was pretty much all I did, you know. And so when I started traveling in France, I realized that it was a really stupid thing to not have taken advantage of that, frankly. And I wanted to finish what I started and learn French so I could speak it relatively fluently. So I got hooked up with a language partner in Madison, which is where I was working at the time. He was from France. His daughter attended the university. He wanted to learn English, okay? And I wanted to learn French, so we met at a bar, okay? And each week we'd trade off. You know, one week would be English, and another would be French, and we'd talk, have a few drinks or whatever. And then I got to meet some of his friends who were from France. Then I started going to La Maison Française in Madison, which is the French house there, and met a lot of people there, and studied books I brought from Barnes & Noble, listened to tapes, and over the years I realized I wasn't really going to learn French very well by being in America, though, because everybody speaks English, all right? Some, but not enough, okay? So I towards the end of my career, I actually retired in 2011, okay? And around that time period, I decided to go to a French immersion school in France, okay? And so I found this town in the south of France called Villefranche-sur-Mer. It's right next to Nice, and it's on the Riviera. It's a very picturesque town. And I went to a French institute there, l'Institut de Français, that's what it was called. And it was a 4-week-long immersion school, 8 hours a day of constant drilling by French instructors. It was really almost as hard as law school in many ways. Their whole method of teaching there is very strict, okay? And they call on you, you know. Ken, ask Jeanette why she was late for class yesterday. And you'd have to ask it in French. And Jeanette, what did Ken ask you? John, what did Ken ask Jeanette? And it would go on and on like that for several hours. And you're like, I have a headache. Can I get some coffee now? It was kind of like that, all right? And I went there twice, and I went to the school 2 times, once in 2010 and once in 2011. And then I stayed in France for 2 months afterwards. So I got a little better fluency that way. And also I made a lot of really great friends. I got off the beaten path. I wasn't a tourist anymore. They know me there. You know, Monsieur Ken.
How old were you, Ken?
I did that when I was 2011, so I was in my 50s. 55, 56 in there. A lot of people there at the school were retired, okay? But there are a lot of younger people there too. There were people there for diplomatic purposes. They wanted to learn it. So it was a very good school, one of the best ones in France. So at any rate, another thing I decided to do as I got into retirement was to write more, keep my mind together, all right, as I got older, all right? And so I wrote my first book, which was self-published, called Real Lawyers. And it's based upon a system that, of law, a corrupt, if you would, justice system in Louisville, Kentucky, where I was a public defender. And the idea of real lawyers is that people don't think that the clients don't think you're a real lawyer if you're a public defender. And so the protagonist in the book tries to figure out what that means, all right? So then I decided to write another book, and I said, well, why not write about the criminal justice system in France? Well, okay, so I wrote a novel about it called Chez Betty, all right? It's called Chez Betty, that's the hotel I stayed at during French immersion school. And all the characters emerge from Chez Betty. It's run by a woman named Betty, or Betty, you know, okay? 75-year-old woman runs it, along with her family. And a lot of family-owned businesses in France, by the way. So I said, well, I got to learn the French criminal justice system, right? You know? And so I studied French code manuals. This is one. And you want to, you know, think legalese is hard to read. Try reading French legalese. Okay? So I studied that. I read books like this, which are in French, that are interviews of prisoners and some of the struggles they have within the French criminal justice system, okay? And I met an individual through La Maison Française in Madison who was a French public defender. They have public defenders, believe it or not, in Paris, okay? And he worked with me in teaching me the system of justice in France and making sure my book was accurate and in coaching me on all the procedural nuances. And for over a year and a half, we corresponded by email for me to get that down and for me to understand it, okay? So I have a lot of experience in the American justice system. I probably had about 150 jury trials, just jury trials alone, that I've done, all right, and argued. And I've had hundreds of hearings otherwise, tens of thousands of cases, okay? I haven't done that in the French justice system, but I have learned about the system there through someone else, and this has enabled me to make a comparison, which is I'm going to do tonight, all right? Now, as I see, I want to get to that Chez Betty. One of the first things I want to talk about is the nature of the police in France, all right? There are basically three organizations that you're dealing with there. One is called La Gendarmerie, like gendarme, La Gendarmerie. La Gendarmerie is a national police organization in France. It is a military organization. It is paid for by the military, all right? Our police organizations in our country are civilian organizations. They may look like they're military because they wear uniforms and they have guns, okay? But they are ruled by the civilians, by the citizens. They have to answer to somebody. Not the case with La Gendarmerie. They're going to answer to the military personnel that they deal with, okay? They handle cases or crimes that occur in the suburbs, in the rural areas, in small towns, all right? But that's it. The second organization they have there for policing is called La Police Nationale, all right? La Police Nationale deals with crimes that occur in large urban areas, all right? They are a civilian organization. And the third one is what they call La Police Municipale, local police. They're paid for by localities, all right? They're also civilian. And they deal with petty offenses, what we would say a misdemeanor would be here. Disorderly conduct, retail theft, small offenses, not major stuff, okay? Traffic offenses, which they call contraventions, okay? So those are the three main ones. There are other ones too that are smaller, that are very specialized, but those are the three main ones. And that's the nature of police in France. This is just a picture of a gendarmerie sign in Nice. And this is Police Nationale. What was interesting when I went there was that just how militaristic even it was. I mean, you had a perimeter around it with a fence for the police station. And you had a gate. And you had to talk to a person that was armed at a gate to get in or to talk to anybody. It's a little different than here. But at any rate, one of the first steps in the criminal justice process in America, often cases start this way, is what's called a Terry stop, or a stop and frisk, okay? It comes from a court case called Terry versus Ohio. And what it says is you have to have a reasonable, articulable suspicion to stop someone, that they've done some wrongdoing or committed some offense. Could be a traffic offense, could be a criminal offense, but you need an articulable suspicion, something you can articulate that's reasonable. And then they stop them and they either allay or confirm their suspicion based on their conversation with the individual. And during that process, they can pat them down for weapons. All right. If they find something else like drugs, all the better from a prosecutor's standpoint because it's a lawful search. Okay. Now, what happens with that is it is a brief conversation. Brief, I mean a matter of minutes. If you go on too long, it turns into an arrest. Okay. So they want to get it over with, you know, get what they can quickly. In France, they don't have a Terry stop because they didn't have Terry versus Ohio, right? They have, though, something they can abuse far more, and it's called an identity check. Okay? They can stop somebody without reasonable suspicion and verify their identity. Okay? I had it happen to me. I was in the Paris metro. Okay? And they came up to me and they demanded that I produce my passport, produce my reason for being there, which was my ticket for the subway, and I didn't have any further problem. But they didn't have any suspicion that I did anything wrong. They can do that in France. You cannot do that in the United States of America. Okay. What was interesting too about it though is that I learned in the course of studying this whole thing that an identity check can last for 4 hours. So the police can have at you for 4 hours. If you wish to have a lawyer, want to call a family member, go ahead. Of course, if you're visiting in France, you probably don't know anybody to do that. And that's part of what happens in Chez Betty. There's an American that gets entrapped in the French criminal justice system and has to go through that. And of course, they can use this because they legally hold you during that period of time to question you about whatever they want. Maybe it's a crime. It may not have anything to do with this. Housekeeping procedure turns into that. It could. Usually it doesn't, but if they wanted to, it can happen that way. All right? So that's where the thing gets started. Now, the next step in the process that is important that I want to talk about is search warrants. All right? Okay, in France, that's a picture of Chez Betty, by the way. It's a nice old hotel. It's built in the 30s. You feel like you're staying at your grandmother's. It's really nice. I really loved it. Nice high ceilings. None of the modern conveniences of a hotel, but it was beautiful. Betty told me, she says, if you want to keep milk here, just put it out on the ledge. It was kind of like that. But at any rate, the reason I have this up here in conjunction with the search warrant is that in the book Chez Betty, that's where a search warrant is executed. In France, they call them perquisitions, all right? To get a search warrant in our country, you need probable cause. And you need to be able to show probable cause that at the moment you're seeking a search warrant from a judge, that there's evidence in a certain location. It could be your body. It could be your home. It could be your car. It could be your safety deposit box. Some area where you have a reasonable expectation that it is to be private. You need a warrant. And it needs to be probable cause to believe there is evidence there. All right? Now, France, there isn't probable cause. They do not have the Fourth Amendment. They do not have our Constitution. There isn't, the concept of probable cause that exists in this country does not exist there. A judge is required to issue a perquisition, but there isn't that standard. They just do it if they want to without a standard. Okay? So that happens in the book. I describe a situation where in this country they wouldn't have probable cause. The information is stale, such that it's old, such that we don't know that the evidence is still there. That means there's no probable cause in this country. All right? There, that might be different. Okay? So that's where America kind of gets a little ahead of the French on that. But the French do a better job, I think, as far as the execution of a warrant. In America, they can execute a search warrant in the middle of the night. In fact, the police would prefer to execute it in the middle of the night because then you're naked or in pajamas or something, and they have control of you in the situation, okay? And you can't get rid of evidence as easy. It's dark, that's why they do it then, okay? In France, they can only execute a search warrant at your home between the hours of 6 a.m. and 9 p.m. So they're very genteel about this. I don't know if it's because they just don't, work on those other hours or whatever, but it's an odd rule. You see this in France. You think, why would they do that? But that's just what they do, So in that way, they're a little better, than us. So I don't know. It's sort of even. Much of these things, when I compare which is better, how they do it with sports teams, they say, edge to Michigan State or edge to Madison, Wisconsin. I guess I could do that, but it's a lot more complex than that. There are arguments you can make for both systems, throughout this. So that's your search warrant situation there. The next step in the system is what is called a garde à vue. Okay? A garde à vue comes from the French phrase garde, which is keep or kept, all right? And vue would be seen or okay, or view. So they're keeping you to view you, sort of, is a concept, all right? And they can do this for a certain period of time. In America, we would call that a full-blown arrest, okay? Now, everybody knows from TV the concept of Miranda rights, right? Okay, when they don't have to give you a Miranda rights in America until you're in custody. A simple stop, they don't really have to give you Miranda rights because you're not in full-blown custody. That's the only time it's going to be triggered, where they actually, you see they do it all the time on TV. If you're not going to interrogate somebody, or if you haven't really put them in custody, you don't have to give them Miranda. But they often do. And, you have the right to remain silent, all that stuff. Well, in France, when you get into a garde à vue, they talk to you, they say, you have a right to, you're charged with, we're thinking of charging you with X offense, and you have a right to have a lawyer here if you want to. That's basically what it is. If you got a medical problem, we'll bring a doctor in, that kind of thing. One of the things they don't really go into that much is the idea that you have the right to remain silent. And there's a reason for that. France does not have a Fifth Amendment. The Fifth Amendment in our country says that you cannot be made to testify against yourself. And furthermore, your election not to testify cannot be held against you in court or otherwise. And that's part of the basis of Miranda, the Fifth Amendment. It's unbelievable, but the idea in France is that a criminal defendant cooperate with the authorities. They can't make you talk. They're not going to torture you to get you to talk. But if you don't talk, they might consider it as evidence of your recalcitrance might be used against you. Why are you hiding? What's the problem here? See, that can't occur. At least it's not supposed to occur here. It doesn't mean it doesn't occur. Why do you want to invoke your rights? You got something to hide? Just let's clear this up. See. So, in regard to Miranda, it doesn't exist there. They have a modified version of it, but it's not the same level. Now, let me talk to you a minute about how long they can keep you. And it's not that far off from the American system, all right? In America, if they arrest you and decide to charge you with an offense, they have 48 hours to get you before a bail judge under a case called Riverside versus California. That's it. So put up or shut up in 48 hours. In France, they can keep you in a garde à vue initially 24 hours. They can extend that another 24 hours after that for a total of 48. So it's very similar. In cases of terrorism or terroristic offenses, 72 hours, okay? So it's similar to our system. At a certain point, somebody's got to see a judge there, just like here. Like a bail judge, they would have a detention judge, all right? And they decide whether they're going to let you out or not. So there's that. Now, so far, what I've talked about, all right, are procedural matters that come up before the court system really gets involved directly, okay? And this system isn't, that different than ours. Some differences I've highlighted here, some technical differences, okay? But not that different. This is where it gets, though, really different, is when you're talking about charging cases and when you're talking about investigating cases from this point forward, all right? The French criminal justice system is not based upon the English criminal justice system the way our system is. Our system is an adversarial system. And by that I mean this. Two lawyers argue a case. And by that fighting and conflict, we're able to determine the truth. A neutral juror or a neutral judge will be able to judge the truth or the correct law from that fight. It's a fighting theory of justice. And that comes from England. All right? Not the case in France. France's law isn't derived from England, it's derived from Napoleon. And their system is not adversarial. It is inquisitorial. The theory is that you have a neutral judge that investigates a case, that presents a case in court. The Grand Inquisitor, if you wish, okay, does it. Lawyers are secondary. Here, lawyers run everything in a case, all right? They really do. Judges are a little more, they just call the shots if there's a dispute, all right? In France, the lawyers are sort of permitted to talk if the judge gets done and allows you to talk, okay, or allows you to question, all right? That's because their system is inquisitorial versus adversarial. Now, I don't know which is a better system. You know, I've dealt with an adversary system all of my life. And I know shenanigans get pulled, okay? That's the truth. And the truth doesn't always come out. The adversarial system assumes that individuals are of equal capability on both sides, equal financial ability, that information hasn't been hidden, okay? It assumes a lot of things for the truth to come out that way, right? Well, in France, they turn it over to an individual, the investigation, to a guy called the Judge of Instruction, the JI, Juge d'Instruction, okay? Lifelong civil servant who investigates the case. He issues search warrants or perquisitions. He gets expert testimony. He takes depositions of witnesses. He brings the defendant in and sees if he wants to talk. And they do this, and it's called the period of instruction. And then he or she decides what to charge, if anything. Not a prosecutor. It is a judge that plays that role. In some ways, that's better. You know, some ways it might be worse, but that's what they do. The period of instruction can go on for a while, by the way, up to 12 months for an ordinary case, 24 months for a murder case, 36 months for a case involving terrorism. And if you think about that, where are you in the meantime? You might be in jail, or you might be released on bond. Now, in France, there is a bail hearing that can occur, and it's called a detention hearing. In America, a bail hearing, you either have monetary or non-monetary conditions of release. A monetary condition of release would be cash bail. Most of the time they don't do that, but sometimes they do, and it's kind of discriminatory against the poor, really. And we're moving away from that more. And then they have non-monetary conditions like stay away from this person, don't engage in any acts or threats of violence, sign in at bail monitoring, that kind of stuff. They use more non-monetary conditions in France than in our country, so that's good for France. Except they have something called detention provisoire. It's like in America, it's called preventative detention, where there isn't any bail at all. You're so dangerous, we're not going to let you out under any circumstances. That's done frequently on our federal level, all right? It's never done on the state level. And all the thousands of cases I've never seen one instance of preventative detention in this country. You see it on the federal level, though. They're stricter, believe me. But in France, they do detention provisoire sometimes, murder cases and things like that. So it's not like they're going to let you out on non-monetary conditions on a very serious offense. that endangers the public. So going back to our judge of instruction. Oh, by the way, this is the front of the courthouse in Nice. Above the doorways, you can't see it in these pictures, are the phrase liberté, égalité, and fraternité. You know what that's from? That's the battle cry of the French Revolution. So when you go in there, you have this feeling of, wow, you know, there's an awe kind of, you know, you're looking at the middle, you know, a long time ago, you know, that's one impression you get when you go to France is that things are much older in Europe than here. We're a young country, we really are. You know, and Paris has been around since 900. Where were we in 900? You know. So also on the courthouses on the top, there is the phrase loi, L-O-I, all right, on one side, and droit on the other. Law and rights, okay? And if you think about it, law inheres in the government. Rights inhere in the individual. And the court system settles the juxtaposition of those two concepts. So it's very symbolic. It's a very good point that's being made by them. So back to the question about the judge of instruction. The judge of instruction can deny charges altogether after this period of instruction, or the judge of instruction can charge a délit. A délit is an offense that carries up to 10 years in France. Or they could charge a crime which carries over 10 years to life. They do not have the death penalty in France. But they do have life sentences. You know what they call it? They call it condamnation perpétuité. Perpetual condemnation. You know, and that sounds pretty scary if you start thinking about that I have no chance to get out. Okay? It's perpetual. But cases that are délits go to the tribunal correctional. Cases that are crimes go to the cour d'assises. The cour d'assises is where you might see a jury trial. Cour tribunal is judges. They are sending people to prison without a jury trial. In fact, I'll get into this later, but only when you're facing over 20 years in France do you get a jury trial in the cour d'assises. So think about that. Our Sixth Amendment says you have a right to a jury trial in all cases, all criminal cases. So I don't care if it's a simple OWI. I don't care if you're going to spend a night in jail. You have to have a jury trial here if you want it. That's not the case in France. You might have these judges judging you, and they've seen it all. But it's interesting, talk about overcrowded courts, because they don't have really as many jury trials there. Their courts are not very overcrowded. I was going in Nice, and I was just flabbergasted. There was not many people there. Their dockets weren't that long. Nice has 400,000 people in it. There were 3 courtrooms. Family court, court tribunal, you know, the correctional, you know, tribunal correctional, all right, and cour d'assises. That's it for a town that big. That would be unheard of here. In Madison, they say they probably have 400,000 or 500,000 people in the county. They have 18 circuit court divisions, okay, for all that mess. Well, some of it's they don't have as many jury trials there. Maybe they also don't have as many victimless crimes they charge. Could also be that they're more efficient. I don't know, but it is a shock when you're there. So that's the choice of that the JI makes. Okay. Now, I talked about bail already, and I want to talk for a minute about speedy trial. In our Constitution, you have a right to a speedy trial. By statute, you have a right to a speedy trial as well, and there are actual number limitations that are placed. Usually a trial from the time of arrest to the trial itself is probably 6 to 9 months. Not too bad. It's not as bad as you think. I've had cases much longer. That's probably a ballpark. In France, they don't have the right to a speedy trial. They have statutory time limits. I talked to you about the ones involving the JI, okay? That's just to get it charged, okay? It's longer than what it takes us to get the whole thing done. It takes a long time. So they don't really have a concept of a speedy trial there, but I think most cases probably resolve. I guess it doesn't make much difference, but in some cases it can be an abusive kind of thing too. Now, up until now, I've been talking about pretrial procedures. These are pictures, just so you know. That's the courthouse. This is maison d'arrêt, house arrest, house of arrest. That's a French jail. That's the phrase for French jail. Maison d'arrêt. That's the maison d'arrêt de Nice, in Nice. It is like a prison in terms of size, because it's a large community, right? In jails in our country, we keep people who are on short sentences or people who are facing trial. Longer sentences, people go to prison. And it's the same thing in France. Short sentences, short timers. At any rate, here's another picture too. This is a wider angle, black and white picture of it. And that's in the middle of Nice. And, it's pretty foreboding looking, actually, when you're there. It's very depressing. That's one thing I learned in France. We think we have problems in this country. They have problems, too. They have the same kind of problems. They have domestic violence. They have problems with drugs. You meet people from France here, and you meet people that don't have problems. That's why they're able to come over here. But when you go there, you see people the way they really are there. And what's great about that, though, in a way, is you realize they're kind of the same as us. They may speak another language, they may have another culture, but deep down, they have the same kind of problems. They have the same kind of things they like to do. They have sports bars that may be different sports, soccer places or whatever, they're into that, le foot. But, they have game shows on TV just like we do, okay? We really have more of a kinship than what you might think, okay? At any rate, next we go to trial procedure. Jury selection is the first stage in America. Jury selection, what occurs is primary and secondary jury selection. Primary jury selection is the list you use to get the jurors. Voter list. Here in Wisconsin, we use driver's license list because they're more diversified in terms of race, because there's complaints that not enough people of different races get on juries, okay? Secondary is where we bring people in and we question them in a group, in a process called voir dire, all right? We ask them questions about their biases. We ask them questions about their qualifications as jurors. And then I, as a lawyer, can move to strike an individual and justify that they be removed from the panel. It's called a just cause challenge. And then there are peremptory challenges where I don't have to give a reason. It could be the color of their tie or how they look, as long as it isn't racial. Okay, you can strike them. Each side gets 5. France, they don't have voir dire. Now that's a French phrase, right? It means to see, to say. Figuratively, it means speak the truth. The jurors are supposed to be honest with you and speak the truth, even though they don't all the time. Okay, they don't have a questioning process. Lawyers just get the list. Here's the list that was randomly drawn from the citizen list from this department or county, and cross out the names you don't want. They don't even see the people. They might know their occupation. Oh, I don't like the fact that I'm not going to have this person. I mean, that's it, all right? So difference in jury selection, for sure. Opening statement, in the U.S. we have an opening statement. Prosecutor, defense say what they think the evidence is going to show. It's not a time to argue, but it's a time to present a roadmap to the jury about your evidence. Now, France, that doesn't happen. They just bring the defendant in and say, do you want to challenge us or not? If you do, then we go ahead. Call your first witness. It's like that, all right? What's interesting about that, though, is that there's a reason for that. You know, I was talking about the judge of instruction, all right? The judge of instruction prepares a dossier. There is an exchange of information between the lawyers. Everybody has the information. It's everybody's information. It's called the dossier, okay? The jury gets that, all right? Which is good, because you don't have to have an opening statement because they're familiar with the case before they get in there, all right? Having read the dossier. So that's why. Presentation of the evidence is substantially different. Here we go back to the concept of the inquisitorial system again, okay? In the United States, we have a prosecution case, a defense case, a prosecution rebuttal case, a defense rebuttal case, and so forth, and it goes back and forth because it's adversarial, right? Lawyers question their witnesses in their case. France, there isn't a prosecution case or defense case. There's the case, okay? And the case is presented by a judge. Now, on a jury, you have 3 judges that are on the jury among the 9 in the cour d'assises. And it's just crazy. So now the judge is a part of the charging, because the judge of instruction charges. And now the judge is a part of the decision-making process on the jury. You know, that doesn't happen here. You know, they have 3 votes too. So, you know, one of their brethren has decided there's enough evidence to charge. Are they going to go against them? You know, if you got 6 citizens, they're going to get dominated by those judges in there, right? See, and so we have 12 people that are citizens. Now, on the other hand, because they're citizens, they may not have as much experience dealing with these kinds of arguments, the kinds of things that are said and done. All right, so there's a little bit on both sides there, okay? But the judge presents the case, and then the lawyers get the question afterwards, okay? And jurors can ask questions, too. And I've seen the courtroom, and the way it works is they have this panel, it looks like a Nuremberg kind of courtroom, okay? They have this large counter that goes all the way across the back of the court. The courtrooms aren't deep, they're wide, all right? And the jurors sit in those seats along with the 3 judges. There's 9 seats across. And there is, to the left, if you're looking towards the back of that counter, a box. It's called box d'accusé. That's where they keep the defendant in the trial. And the lawyer is there with him. And it's way across. It's like they're not involved in the whole process. They're really separated from it. You get that feeling. You know, a lawyer might object from the box. You know, I didn't hear you. What was it? You know, it's like that far away. It's like he's on Mars, you know, the defendant. But at any rate, the judge's question, and that's how the evidence is presented. Now, when I talked to this Parisian public defender, I said, how does this really operate? He says, well, what they do is they bring in the witnesses, and they might question a witness for a while, then they might decide to go to another witness for a while and come back to the first witness. They may discuss the first witness's case. in America, we don't discuss about witnesses in court before the trier of fact. That gets done in deliberations before by the jury, right? Well, they do it all along. And I said, this kind of seems to me like kind of chaotic. We have this structured system in America of rules of evidence, prosecution case, defense case. He said, no, that's not the case in France. I said, well, it kind of seems to me like it's an intellectual discussion, a trial, with the assistance of witnesses. He says, you have it exactly right, monsieur. That's exactly what we do. And so you have to ask yourself, well, which system is better? The structured, rule-oriented system that we have, or the system where they kind of collegially discuss the case and call people in and get it right, make sure they clarify things. Maybe they have it right. I don't know. So that's the trial. As I mentioned, this is just, let me backtrack a second. This is a picture of a robe d'avocat, all right, lawyer robe. In France, lawyers wear robes, and they have these rabat, which is your scarf, and they used to wear toques, hats. They're called toques. They don't anymore. The French public defender, he said, in Paris, there's still two or three of them that still do that. They're real traditionalists. But at any rate, they don't wear wigs like they do in England, at least. But in America, of course, we wear like suit, coat, and tie, or business suit, or if you're a woman, or something, professionally dressed. But we don't wear robes. Judges wear robes. The judges wear robes in France, and they're very colorful, much more colorful than our robes. You feel like you're in church. At any rate, as I mentioned before, your jury trial right is very limited in France. Very few cases actually have a jury trial. How many times are you going to be facing over 20 years? Maybe when you have a murder case, aggravated rape, aggravated burglary of some sort, maybe. Very rare, actually. Composition of the jury, I already went over. The burden of proof. The burden of proof in the United States, is beyond a reasonable doubt. We have the presumption of innocence. And until it is proven by evidence beyond a reasonable doubt, that presumption is not overcome. All right? And you can't use the defendant to get that done. You can if they take the stand, but if they choose not to, you can't comment on it or anything. In the United States, we have to have all 12 jurors agree that someone is guilty. It's called a unanimous verdict. It is required by law in every criminal case. France, it doesn't have to be that way. It's 6 of 9 that are on the jury. All right, and there's no beyond a reasonable doubt. There's no standard. They have a presumption of innocence. But when it's overcome is not necessarily stated. All right, what the burden actually is. So it's a little looser burden there. Which would you rather? Would you rather have 12 citizens like you that have to all agree you're guilty beyond a reasonable doubt versus 9 where they don't all have to agree and 3 of them are judges? You go and you think about that for a second. France is a very, very developed democracy, is a very well-developed country, all right? But we do have rights here that we should appreciate, and one of them is the right to a jury trial. And I think that kind of goes in favor of the United States, all right? Now, I want to mention something, and I want to open it up to questions. It's a concept called double jeopardy. You can't, in our society, because of our Constitution's double jeopardy prohibition, try somebody twice for the same crime. Now, that doesn't mean it doesn't happen. Let's say a defendant loses and they appeal, and there's some error of law. It gets reversed, it's tried again. Well, that's a second trial, but it's because the defendant wants that, okay? Also, if there's a hung jury, there can be another trial. But those are the only instances. In France, it works differently. There is no double jeopardy in France, okay? The way it works is they say we have the first trial. The Cour d'Assises in Nice is the court of the first instance, the first instance. If either side, anybody can appeal, the victim can appeal, the prosecution can appeal if they lose, the defense can appeal. And it's not like in our courts, you go to the Court of Appeals, there's questions of law that get resolved, not fact at the Court of Appeals level. The Court of Appeals level in France, it is a new jury trial or a new trial, depending upon whether you got a jury in the first place, right? That's it. At that trial, the verdict is 9 of 12, 3/4. Now, you think, golly, you know, the bad part is they keep somebody on hook for a while, right? Could potentially, right? Years. But the good part of it is, from their perspective, is remember, we don't have 12 people on the jury. It's not a unanimous verdict. It's not beyond a reasonable doubt. But we have 2 jury trials where you have, you know, we get it right still. And I think they do. It's just a different way of approaching it. Okay? No double jeopardy. It sounds horrible. You know, no double jeopardy clause there, but there's reasons for it. Okay? I'm going to stop my part right now. I want you to see if you have any questions. I'll stay here as long as you want. If I can't answer a question, I'll say I can't. Go ahead.
So how much racial profiling goes on with the police or in the whole criminal justice system? I mean, ours is all totally out of whack.
Yeah, well, you know, I have my own opinions about that as a prosecutor, but I will say this. They do have problems of racial disparities and racial issues in France. They are not the same racial ones that we would have here. Here it's more African American versus, you know, European American kind of thing, all right? In France, it's more the Maghrébins. The Maghrébins come from an area of Europe, northern Africa, Algeria, you know, various countries in North Africa. And they are very much an abused minority in France. Economically, their youth unemployment is about 70%. Okay? They have very high unemployment otherwise. There's lots of allegations of discrimination. 60% of the people that are in prison are Maghrébins. Okay? So there's racial disparities and problems there, but they're of a different race. But it's there. Going back to my statement that the problems we have here are problems they have there.
These are left over from their colonies.
Yeah. And yeah, exactly. And some of them don't know French when they get there, so they get behind in the schools, they can't get employed. You know, it's a rolling effect, something like what happens with racial disparities here. You know, they get walked to the prison door. Okay. Another question?
Yeah, what is the cooperation between all those departments? Is it anything like ours? Or-
Yeah, of the police departments?
Yeah.
Yeah, they're gonna cooperate. I don't think they're competing. I think here, you know, you might get some competition here with the federal level versus the state. I always kind of resented the feds when they came in. I was a state prosecutor, I didn't like it. Sometimes they help me on cases though too. Go ahead.
Can you tell us anything about the difference in the 2 juvenile systems, the U.S. juvenile system?
Differences between the 2 juvenile systems.
Right. I honestly don't know a lot about that there. Yeah, she wants to know about the juvenile systems in the respective countries, okay? Most of those are handled as a part of family court there. I do know that. So it's sort of treated as a family matter with a family law judge that deals with it. I don't know, you know, I can't like do like I did with the adult system and go through the whole process.
You know what the age of adulthood is?
18.
18?
I know that because you have to be 18 to be on a jury there, on their jury list, okay? That's the age of majority.
Just wondering, are judges elected or appointed?
Oh, excellent question, and I meant to go through this. Okay. Defense lawyers go to a school called École de Droit, right school. We call law school, so that shows their emphasis, all right? Prosecutors and judges go to magistrate school. That's because, and so they go to a separate school, actually. It is a lifelong calling to be a judge or a prosecutor in France. They are not elected. They are not appointed. Edge to France, in my opinion. That's just my opinion. I don't like the judges that are elected or appointed, though I think it can bring them closer to the people and a better understanding. My own opinion is you should have professional judges, you know, that are professionally trained for that purpose, and that's what they do in France. Go ahead.
Despite our having 12 people on a jury and, well, everything that you talked about, they get it wrong sometimes, whether it
Occasionally.
be because of lawyers who are
Sure.
not trying hard enough or rigged evidence, whatever.
Can be, yes.
But we have groups such as the Innocence
Innocence Project.
that try to rectify some of these things.
Sure.
I'm wondering if in France, how often this happens, and are there groups such as the Innocence Project that help people who are wrongly convicted?
I'm sure there are. Okay, I don't know the name there, but I will say this. They're very sensitive to that issue. One of the things I wrote about was a 5-year-old witness in my book. And they had in a case where an individual, sort of like the McMartin preschool case, I don't know if you're familiar with that, a number of people were convicted of child sex offenses that were not guilty, innocent people, and so that was out in California. They had a similar case in France, and they almost overreacted with it. They said that children couldn't testify at all, which is the other extreme. They can talk to the judge, but they're never sworn. They're not capable of being sworn under oath. Here we would say they can be sworn in, like any other witness. Because that happened, that was the reaction to that. So they are sensitive to that issue, though I don't know the group's names. I'm sure they have things like that there.
You mentioned the Algerians. The Algerians have the right of citizenship at one time, didn't they? I'm just wondering how the courts respond to immigration and problems from Algeria. If in fact they had the rights to come, are they subject to the same legal system?
Yes. I don't know all the details of immigration and citizenship regarding it, but yes, they do. They do have the same rights as everyone else. It's just that there are more of them. And you know, that suggests an economic issue, you know. Most of these interviews, this is the book in French of the interviews, are of people from that area of the world, you know. And they say, one guy in there said, look, if I had lived in Neuilly is a rich French suburban, rich Parisian suburb, okay? If I lived in Neuilly and had a nice house there, I wouldn't be doing this. I wouldn't be here. That's what he says. And, you know, a lot of crime is economic. You know, I helped run something called drug court. Got the first drug court going in the state of Madison. And I contributed all the cases to it so it could get started. That was one thing I did in my career. And I often thought that if you wanted to help the criminal justice system in America, you'd have an economic court where you can get people jobs, get them training, get them because economics is where the crime comes from. That's where the drug dealing comes from. That's where the burglaries come from. fix that problem, you're going to fix a lot of crime. But it's hard to convince people of that. It involves money, it involves resources. You know, it's very difficult. Gaining acceptance. People do something a certain way, and it's hard to get them to do something different. It just is. Any other questions? Go ahead.
Do they have a Supreme Court?
Yeah, yeah, let me go into that. I mentioned that they have a court of appeals, which is really a trial court, but they have what would be the equivalent of our appellate court. A Supreme Court in France is called the Cour Cassation. Cassation, it looks like concession, all right? They hear legal issues, all right? They're not a trial court, but it can be appealed up to them, and it is. All right, they had that in Italy. You remember Amanda Knox? She got acquitted by the Court of Cassation, and they have one in Italy. In that area of the world, the systems are very similar. Okay, so that's kind of the levels in France. There may be another one before the Supreme one too. All right, so, but the first level is a trial court. Here, a court of appeals is the next level, and they just hear legal questions. There they hear factual questions. They redo the whole thing. Okay? Other questions? Go ahead in the back. Yeah,
Could you repeat the question? Make sure that
yes.
everybody can hear.
Yes, are there differences in crime rates in the US and in France? The only thing I can say in that regard is that there is going to be less violent crime in France than here. And I don't want to get into a big gun control debate, but guns are heavily controlled in France, so you're not going to see gun crime as much. In order to get a gun, you have to belong to a sports shooting club and pass a mental and physical examination. You usually you can't really even get semi-automatics, much less fully automatic weapons. It's a little different, so you don't have the gun, you don't have armed robberies, they still can get, there are many illegal guns in France, all right, but legally you can't get them so easily. And then they take a dim view of it in the court system. They really nail you if you have one. And that's what I talk about in my book too. So armed robberies, probably less. Rape and sexual offenses, probably about the same level. Murder, maybe not quite as much. They have some gang activity there, but much more victimless. They're not as heavy duty on drug cases, I don't think. But I would say overall, if you were to compare the systems, they would be similar, except you see a lower rate of violent crime in France. So maybe that's why you don't have as crowded courtrooms. It's interesting, and I'll say this, and I don't want to drag on and on about it, but I met with this prosecutor, and it was a night before a rape trial, rape burglary, very bad case, right? And his desk was completely clean. There were no books, there were no papers, there was nothing on his desk. That would be unheard of in our country. I mean, if I had a major case like that the next day, I wouldn't even be talking to anybody else, right? Much less have a clean desk with no books or paperwork on it, okay? And so I said to him, I'd like to see a jury trial sometime, and I'm here for a few weeks. Could I see a jury trial? And he said, well, I have one tomorrow. I'm like, you gotta be kidding me. Yeah, it's a major case. So they wouldn't let me see it, by the way, because in a rape trial, they don't let the public in at all there, okay? But I asked him, I said, well, who are your witnesses? Somewhat naively. He says, well, actually, they're the judge's witnesses. And he pulled up on a computer screen. He says, oh, this is the list right here. He didn't even know who the witnesses were. See, the job of the prosecutor there is completely different. He or she is an afterthought. The judges are responsible for presenting the case. It's different. I said, man, I would surely like to have your job. I mean, it seems like a lot less work. He said, well, it probably doesn't pay as well, so. But they had like maybe 3 prosecutors for the whole doggone system in Nice. And they were tickled to death to talk to me. They really were. American prosecutor, ooh. Go ahead.
So do the judges have huge staffs of people doing all the work?
Yeah, they have a bigger staffs than the prosecutor's office because they got to investigate and type all this crap up, you know? Heck yeah. See, it's the difference of lawyer-based system versus judge, you know, and you see it, you know, in the actual details of the day-to-day process is what I'm saying. Anyway, well, I don't see any more hands. Oh, you got another one.
You said that the judges and the prosecutors go to a different school.
Yeah.
How long is that school versus
Similar.
similar to the United States?
Yeah, similar.
The ones for the defense, that's similar?
Yeah. It's going to be pretty involved training. They are into, you know, they are very, very bureaucratic in France. Even though the trials aren't that bureaucratic, they are. They like that concept. And so they're going to make you cross every T and dot every I to get through those schools. And so, you know, you have to get into them is very difficult.
Do you have to have a bachelor's like?
Yeah. And the other thing about it too is you got to understand that school systems there are different too, way different. You don't have sports teams that are sponsored by schools. They're purely academic endeavors. They're schools, okay? And you think, well, the government pays for them to go to college, but not everybody, unless you have really high test scores on your BAC, that's your exit exam from the lycée or high school, you don't go to college. You know, they go to a technical school or do whatever. I mean, it's free, but you got to get in. And it's the same thing with that process. Okay?
And then they have a bar exam at the end?
I'm not sure, but I'm sure they're very test-oriented, yes. And look what they do to the kids in high school. You don't get your BAC, your high school degree, unless you pass this nationwide exam. They don't do that here. They just get 3 people through high school. You know, just get them through. You know. Well, anyway, thank you very much. I hope that you've enjoyed my talk. I appreciate the opportunity.
And you do have some books up here. Did you want to mention your books at all here?
Right. If you're interested in buying Chez Betty, I'll sell to you for $10. It sells online for a lot more, like 16 or 17.
Thank you very much. And,
Appreciate it.
Hope to all see you here next week for our final lecture.